After 40 years of breaking my back for my family, I expected a toast, maybe even tears of pride. Instead, my son looked me in the eye and said something that shattered me to my core. You will not believe what I did next. But before we dive in, make sure you subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know. My name is Jonathan Reed, and if you had asked me a week ago what I expected from my first night of retirement, I would have told you one thing: joy. I imagined walking into my son's home, raising a glass, and hearing the words every father dreams of. Dad, we're proud of you. You've earned your rest. But life rarely gives us the endings we script in our heads. Sometimes it rips the page in half and forces you to read something you never thought possible. That night, I walked into David's house with a bottle of cheap red wine under my arm. My hands shook a little, not from age, but from excitement. 40 years of breaking my back had finally come to an end. I'd rehearsed my announcement all the way home from the plant. Today was my last day. I'm officially retired. That was all I wanted to say. 4 decades condensed into one sentence, a line that deserved applause, hugs, maybe even a toast. Instead, the words detonated like a bomb. The fork clattered from David's hand onto the plate. Sophie froze mid-bite, her glass suspended in the air. The silence was deafening. I beamed at them, waiting. Nothing. Seconds stretched into minutes, and the warmth I had carried into that kitchen began to turn to ice. David was the first to recover. His cheeks flushed red, his jaw tight. What? You quit? Dad, you can't just do that. Do you even realize what this means? I tried to hold the moment together with a wavering smile. It means I finally get to rest. 40 years of service, son. I thought we could celebrate. But Sophie cut me down before I could finish. Her voice was sharp, deliberate. Celebrate? Jonathan, what you mean is, you expect us to carry you now. You expect us to feed you. My stomach dropped. The air left my lungs. Feed me? As if I was some stray animal scratching at their door. David leaned across the table, his voice hardening into something managerial, something cold. Listen, Dad, I'm not supporting another mouth in this house. Tomorrow you find work. I don't care if it's scrubbing floors or flipping burgers. You are not sitting here living off me. Each word landed like a slap. I looked at him, the boy I raised, the boy whose scraped knees I kissed, and whose college education I paid for, and saw a stranger staring back at me. His face twisted with annoyance, his tone dripping with resentment. Sophie wasn't finished. She leaned back, her eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. You're 65, not 90. Plenty of men your age work. My neighbor's father bags groceries, and he's 73. What makes you so special? I tried to speak, tried to remind them of everything I had given, everything I had sacrificed. But David slammed his hand against the table so hard the dishes rattled. You thought wrong. You think money grows on trees? Do you have any idea what it costs to keep this house running? Insurance, groceries, bills? I work 50 hours a week at Carter Industries just to keep us afloat. His words echoed in my skull. For decades I had broken my body to make sure he never went without. And now, with a voice colder than the grave, he called me a freeloader. Then Sophie delivered the final blow. She leaned forward, lowering her voice as if savoring the cruelty. If he refuses to work, we'll take his pension. Use it for a nursing home. Enough is enough. I won't support dead weight. They drifted into the living room, laughter mixing with the glow of the television. I stayed at the table, staring at the meatloaf turning gray under the light. For the first time in decades, I felt like a ghost in my own family. Silent, invisible, already gone. They didn't stop. They kept talking, their voices lightening as if they'd lifted some great burden. David leaned back, satisfied, and Sophie nodded approvingly, her lips curling into a thin smile. I said nothing. I cleared my throat, forcing myself to play the part. "You're right," I whispered, lowering my eyes. "I should have asked you first." David's face softened slightly, hearing what he thought was defeat. He nodded, already slipping back into authority. "Good, as long as you understand. No freeloaders under my roof." They drifted into the living room, laughter mixing with the glow of the television. I stayed at the table, staring at the empty chairs, the meatloaf turning gray under the kitchen light. The house felt colder than winter, and for the first time in decades, I felt like a ghost in my own family. I remained at the table, staring at their empty chairs, my chest burning with something I hadn't felt in years, a cold, steady anger that cut through the shock. Later that night, lying on the narrow bed they'd given me at the back of the house, I could hear them through the thin walls. Their voices carried, casual and cruel. "He thinks he can just sit here, living off me," David muttered. "And if he refuses to work?" Sophie's tone was sharp, conspiratorial. "Then we take his pension. Send him to a nursing home. He'll have no choice." "Beggars can't be choosers," Sophie said with a laugh. Their laughter drifted through the plaster, casual and dismissive. I lay there, wide awake, staring at the ceiling, gripping the sheets until my knuckles whitened. In that moment, every sacrifice of the past 4 decades came rushing back. The nights I worked double shifts so David could have new textbooks. The day I wrote the check for his wedding, covering costs he never even knew existed. Every sacrifice laid another brick in the foundation of his future, while mine crumbled in silence. And now, he dared to call me dead weight. They thought they had stripped me of my dignity. They thought they had the power. But as I stared into the darkness, a slow, deliberate thought formed in my mind. They had no idea who I truly was. They thought I was weak. They thought I was powerless. They thought they could control me. They were wrong. That night, I made a decision. I would not argue. I would not fight back with words. I would not beg. Instead, I would play their game. I would play it patiently, carefully. And when the time was right, I would show them exactly who I had always been. They thought they were teaching me a lesson. But the truth was, I had just begun teaching them theirs. When I closed my eyes that night, all I could see were the words Sophie had spit like poison. Dead weight. They echoed until morning, buzzing in my ears like a swarm of wasps. And as I stared into the dark ceiling of that cramped little room, the truth rose up inside me like a flood. My son and his wife knew nothing about me. They knew the shell, the weary frame, the tired smile, but they didn't know the man who had carried them for decades. They had no idea what I had endured to build their comfort, and they sure as hell didn't know the secrets I'd kept buried. So let me tell you what they never cared to ask. When David wanted a field trip we couldn't afford, I worked 36 hours straight, so he could board that bus with a smile. When tuition hikes threatened his college dream, I took a second job and starved myself of sleep to keep him in school. And when he married Sophie, I doubled the budget in secret, so her dream of a magical wedding could come true. They never asked how. They never thanked me. And I didn't care, because that's what fathers do. But there's one story they absolutely never knew. 25 years ago, a man named Mason Carter came to me with nothing but an idea and desperation in his eyes. We were in his garage, oil stains on the floor, the air thick with sawdust. He told me about his vision, a small manufacturing company, a dream to build something bigger than himself. Everyone else turned him away. The banks laughed him out the door. But I saw something in him, a fire, the same fire I once had when I was young. So I pulled out every dollar I had saved, scraped together everything, and handed him $500,000. Not a loan, not charity. Faith. Mason Carter built Carter Industries on that faith. Year by year, the company grew from a handful of workers in a garage to a sprawling giant with glass towers, thousands of employees, contracts across the nation. And quietly, through it all, I remained there. Not as an employee, not as a factory hand, but as a partner, a shareholder, a man whose investment had never stopped paying dividends. And here's the irony. My son David walks into Carter Industries every morning, struts through those glass doors, flashes his ID badge like he owns the place. He has no idea he's working for a company built partly on his father's sacrifice. He has no idea his paycheck is tied to the money I risked decades ago. He thinks he climbed that ladder himself. He thinks his authority was earned. And all the while, I've been watching, silent, letting him believe the story he needed to believe. Why didn't I tell him? Because I wanted to see who he truly was without money. And now I know. I wanted to see if he'd grow into a man who respected effort, who valued family over fortune. I wanted to test his character. Now I know the answer. The boy I once carried on my shoulders, the man I thought would carry my name with pride, revealed himself the moment I laid down my tools. Instead of gratitude, he gave me disdain. Instead of respect, he gave me contempt. And Sophie, God, Sophie, she didn't just look at me as a burden. She saw me as currency, a pension to be stolen, a body to be dumped into a nursing home. They see the wrinkles, the calluses, the bent back. But they don't see the empire I helped build. And here's the twist they'll never expect. The same company David worships, the same company he thinks makes him important. That company answers to me. Mason Carter is not just an old acquaintance. He is my brother in arms, my partner, my friend. And if David thinks he can shove me into a broom closet with a mop, if Sophie thinks she can laugh about my pension while hiding her own dirty secrets, then they are about to learn exactly who Jonathan Reed really is. I lay there that night, the house quiet except for their laughter through the walls, and I felt something powerful. Not despair, not defeat. A calm, cold fire. The kind of fire that doesn't rage, but burns steady, controlled, unstoppable. For decades, I gave and gave, never asking for recognition, never demanding thanks. But now I was done hiding. The truth is this: I am not useless. I am not a shadow to be dismissed. I am the man who sacrificed everything so others could stand tall. I am the man who turned sweat into opportunity. I am the man who built more than they could ever comprehend. And soon, my son and his wife will find out that the father they dismissed as useless is the very man holding the strings to their entire world. The morning after their laughter leaked through the thin walls, I walked into the kitchen with a mask on my face. Not anger, not sorrow. Calm, controlled. David and Sophie looked up, waiting for me to bark, to argue, to beg. Instead, I nodded like a beaten man. "You're right," I said softly. "A man my age should still contribute. I'll find work." For a moment, they didn't know how to react. Sophie's brows lifted in surprise. David smirked, his chest swelling with victory. "Good. There's a janitor position at Carter Industries. You'll start Monday." A janitor. In the company I helped build. My own son thought he was humiliating me. I kept my voice steady. "Sounds perfect." He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, relishing the power he thought he held. Sophie reached across the table and patted my hand as if I were a slow child who finally understood. "See, Jonathan? This wasn't so difficult. All you needed was a little push." I lowered my eyes, but inside I was smiling. They thought they'd forced me into submission. What they didn't realize was that I had just agreed to step onto the stage I'd been building in silence for months. Because here's what they didn't know. Sophie had her own secrets. It began in January, long before the dinner table turned into a battlefield. She had left a stack of papers on the counter one morning, expense reports, contracts, invoices. I've spent my life managing numbers, and the moment my eyes scanned the figures, alarms went off. Office supplies inflated by hundreds. Maintenance bills doubled. Fake vendors buried in the fine print. It was sloppy, arrogant. And it screamed one thing: embezzlement. I didn't confront her. No, that would have been too easy, too reckless. Instead, I photographed everything, page after page. Then I called an old friend, Michael Green, a forensic accountant who had built a career on catching thieves like Sophie. Within 3 days, Michael confirmed it. Sophie was funneling thousands into her own accounts. Quietly, methodically, like a spider weaving a web nobody thought to check. I didn't destroy her right away. I waited. I gathered more. Every month, new reports appeared on the counter. Every month, I captured them. Every month, the evidence grew until it was airtight. 8 months of theft, carefully documented, cross-referenced against authentic vendor records Michael pulled through his contacts. The trail was clear. The noose was ready. And as she laughed about nursing homes and pensions, she had no idea that I was holding the blade over her head. That was the other half of my plan. The first half was David. He thought he was clever, bringing me into Carter Industries as a janitor. He thought he was putting me in my place. But I knew better. That building was mine as much as Mason Carter's. Those glass walls, those steel beams, those boardrooms where million-dollar decisions were made, they all existed because of me. David wanted to march me in with a mop in my hand, parade me in front of Mason like a dog on a leash. And I would let him. I would let him believe he'd humiliated me. And when Mason saw me, when recognition flared in his eyes, the truth would detonate right under David's feet. That was phase 1, submission. Phase 2, humiliation turned revelation. Phase 3 was Sophie. But there was still a problem. Timing. Revenge without timing is chaos. I didn't want to simply punish them. I wanted them to feel it unravel piece by piece until every foundation they thought solid crumbled beneath them. So I played the part. I let them believe they were winning. Because victory is sweetest when it turns to ash mid-bite. At night, in my small room, I prepared. I built folders of evidence, one with Sophie's falsified invoices side by side with the originals, one with photographs of her signatures, one with a timeline of deposits hitting her secret account. I created an anonymous email, drafted a letter to her boss, attached every damning document. Then I saved it, my finger hovering over the send button more times than I can count. But I didn't press. Not yet. Because timing matters. And while I waited, I thought about the irony of it all. Sophie, lecturing me about contributing, while she stole from the very company that paid her. David, accusing me of being dead weight, while every paycheck he cashed was tied to the investment I had made decades earlier. They lived in my house, ate from my table, spent the money that had come from my sacrifices, and still they mocked me. It was almost laughable. The weekend passed with a strange electricity in the air. David strutted through the house, rehearsing instructions to train me for janitorial duties, speaking as though he were a CEO preparing his underling. Sophie busied herself with shopping trips, her designer handbags paid for by stolen funds swinging from her arms. And me? I washed the dishes. I folded laundry. I let them see what they wanted to see. A father diminished, obedient, docile. But inside, every second sharpened me. Every insult was a whetstone. Every cruel glance was fuel. When Monday approached, David could barely contain his smugness. He laid out cleaning supplies he'd bought for me, lined them up on the counter like trophies. "Don't embarrass me, Dad," he said, wagging a finger like I was a child. "Carter Industries doesn't tolerate mistakes. Show up, be grateful, follow orders. That's it." "Of course, son," I replied, bowing my head just enough to sell the role. But in my mind, I wasn't bowing. I was waiting. Waiting for the moment Mason Carter would look at me not as a janitor, but as the man who once stood in his garage and gave him $500,000 when no one else believed. Waiting for David's face when he realized the man he'd tried to humiliate was the very man who held the company's future in his hands. Waiting for Sophie's downfall, the day she'd walk through that same door with mascara running down her face, her perfect life shattered by the truth she couldn't outrun. It was all coming, piece by piece. They thought they were in control. They thought they'd clipped my wings. They thought I was trapped. But they forgot one thing. I had spent a lifetime learning how to survive storms. And this time, I wasn't just surviving. I was building a storm of my own. Monday morning came like a storm, heavy and sharp, but I was calm. David had spent the entire weekend puffed up with pride, telling me how I would carry a mop, how I'd finally learn humility. He believed he had broken me. He didn't know I had been waiting for this very day, waiting for the exact moment to tear the mask off and let him see who I really was. We rode to Carter Industries in silence. Portland's streets blurred by the window, gray light reflecting off the wet pavement. David gripped the steering wheel tight, his knuckles white, his voice brittle when he finally spoke. "No mistakes today, Dad. No senior moments. You show up, you do the work, you make me look good. Got it?" "Of course, son," I answered, steady, almost meek. But inside my chest, something roared. When we pulled up, the glass towers of Carter Industries loomed above us, glittering under the weak morning sun. I felt the weight of history pressing against me. This was the house Mason and I had built, from nothing but faith and sweat. And now, my son was marching me inside like a prisoner. We entered the lobby, marble floors shining, employees streaming past with coffee cups, laughter, chatter, the hum of a thriving empire. David walked tall, chest out, one hand pushing a mop bucket he'd insisted I carry. He glanced at me with satisfaction, whispering, "Keep up. Don't embarrass me." I let him lead, let him play his role. My eyes scanned the familiar details, the security desk I helped design, the artwork I'd approved when the company turned profitable, the very smell of polished stone that had once meant triumph. All mine, all ours. Yet David had no idea. And then, like the script I'd been rehearsing in my head for months, Mason Carter appeared at the far end of the corridor. Silver hair perfectly combed, suit pressed sharp, tablet in hand, making his morning rounds. My old friend, my business partner. David lit up like a child spotting Santa Claus. He straightened his tie, his manager's swagger blooming across his face. "Mr. Carter, perfect timing." He grabbed my shoulder and shoved me forward with pride. This here is my father, the new janitor. The words cracked like a gunshot. Mason's eyes flickered to me. Confusion, recognition, and then fury. He stopped dead in his tracks, his voice cutting through the corridor. David, do you have any idea what you've just done? David blinked, confused. Sir, I solved our staffing problem, hired my father as janitor, thought it would help the family situation too. Mason's face hardened, his tone dropping to a dangerous quiet. You brought Jonathan Reed, my business partner, one of the largest shareholders in this company, into my building with a mop in his hand. And you're proud of it? The air vanished from the hallway. Every step, every conversation froze. Employees glanced over, whispers rippling. David's face drained of color. His mouth opened, shut, opened again, like a fish gasping for air. That's impossible, he stammered. He worked in factories all his life. He's poor. No, Mason thundered, his voice carrying. Your father is the reason this company exists. 25 years ago, when no one else believed, he put $500,000 into my dream. Without him, Carter Industries would still be rotting in a garage. Without him, you wouldn't even have a job to lose, which you just did. Gasps rippled. A coffee cup shattered on the floor. David swayed on his feet, his briefcase slipping from his hand, bursting open, papers scattering across the polished marble like the shredded remains of his pride. The echo was final, like a gavel slamming judgment. You're fired, Mason said coldly. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. I stood taller than I had in years. I set the mop down slowly, straightened my shoulders, let the weight of years fall away. I looked at my son, trembling, pale, broken, and felt no triumph, no gloating, only clarity. Mason turned to me, his fury melting into respect. Jonathan, my friend, let's talk in my office. We walked together through the corridor, employees parting like water. David stumbled behind us, silent, ghostly pale. Inside Mason's office, the mahogany desk, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the walls lined with photos of our milestones, I sat in the chair where I had sat countless times before. David hovered near the door, hollow-eyed, staring at the evidence of a life he never knew. Mason leaned forward, anger simmering. Explain this to me, Jonathan. Why the hell did your son just introduce you as a janitor? I looked at David, then back at Mason. Because he thought I was powerless. Because he believed the lie I let him believe. That I was just a tired old man, barely scraping by. Mason turned his glare to David. Do you understand what your father has done for you? Do you understand where your education, your wedding, your house came from? Do you understand that every step you've taken was built on his back? David's lips quivered. I didn't know. Didn't know? Mason spat. Didn't know to respect him? Didn't know to show gratitude? Didn't know that blood deserves loyalty? The silence thickened. Then David's phone buzzed. He glanced down, his hands trembling. His face collapsed as he read the message. Sophie. She'd been suspended from her job, her company investigating embezzlement. My evidence had landed. His eyes shot to me, full of horror. You? You knew? I met his gaze, calm, steady. I always knew. The room was still. Mason leaned back, shaking his head. Jonathan, what do you want me to do about this? I rose from the chair, feeling taller than I had in decades. Nothing. Justice has already been served. I turned to my son, his eyes wet, his lips pressed tight, his entire world unraveling in a single morning. You wanted me humbled, David. You wanted me to serve you. Now you see who I truly am. I gave you everything, and you repaid me with contempt. Consider this your education. Late, but not forgotten." David opened his mouth, closed it, his body sagging into the chair like a man twice his age. He had no words left. I walked out of that office with Mason at my side, the corridors alive with whispers, every eye on me. For years I had been invisible, diminished, dismissed. Now I walked into the light, not as a janitor, not as dead weight, but as Jonathan Reed, builder, partner, father. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt whole. The day I walked out of Carter Industries, the air felt different. Crisp, alive, charged. For years I had carried the weight of silence, hiding the truth of who I was, letting David believe I was a man of scraps and fatigue. But that mask was gone now. Mason's words still echoed in my ears. "Jonathan, this is your company as much as mine." In the corridor, I had stood revealed, not as a burden, not as a janitor, but as the man who had built the very foundation David walked upon. He thought he held power over me, but the truth had stripped him bare in front of everyone. Yet the real storm was still brewing, because the moment David's phone buzzed with Sophie's suspension, I knew this wasn't just about respect anymore. This was about survival. Their empire, the illusion they had built on my back, was about to collapse. And it would collapse fast. That evening, I returned to the house. The same walls, the same furniture, but the atmosphere had shifted. David sat in the living room, staring blankly at the floor, his tie loosened, his face gray. He didn't even look up when I entered. Sophie was in the kitchen, her phone clutched in her hand, mascara smeared down her cheeks. She had been crying for hours. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. They're bringing in auditors, Jonathan. They have records, documents, everything. Someone's been watching me for months." I let my face remain calm, even sympathetic. "That sounds serious, Sophie." Her head snapped up, eyes red, desperate. "You don't understand. If they press charges, we could lose everything. The house, the cars, David's reputation." David's voice exploded from the living room, ragged and raw. "My reputation is already gone. Fired, humiliated, in front of everyone. Do you know what Mason said to me? He said I'd disgraced the name Reed. Do you have any idea what it's like to hear that? From him?" I stood in the doorway between them, watching the fractures widen, their once smug confidence shattering into rubble. They were crumbling under the weight of their own arrogance, their own cruelty. And the irony was bitter. They had tried to throw me into a nursing home, strip me of dignity, erase me. Now it was their lives being dismantled piece by piece. Sophie collapsed into a chair, her voice trembling. "Jonathan, you have to help us. Please, talk to Mason. Talk to Henderson. Tell them something." The audacity of it nearly made me laugh. The same woman who days ago had called me deadweight was now begging me for salvation. I walked into the room slowly, each step deliberate, and placed my hands on the back of a chair. My voice came low, steady, cutting through the chaos. All my life, I gave without question. For David's education, his wedding, his home, I sacrificed my body, my time, my dreams. And what did I receive in return? Contempt? Derision? You plotted to take my pension, to lock me away in some home like yesterday's garbage? David finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot, his voice brittle. "Dad, I was wrong. I didn't know. I didn't understand." "No," I said sharply. "You didn't want to understand. Respect shouldn't require wealth. Gratitude shouldn't demand proof. You should have honored me because I am your father, not because of what I own. And Sophie, I turned to her, my eyes narrowing. You laughed about my end while you were stealing from your own company. Tell me, how much integrity does that buy? The silence after that was heavy. Sophie lowered her face into her hands. David sat trembling, like a man staring at ruins he couldn't rebuild. For a long moment, I let the weight of my words sink in. Then I straightened, my decision made. I won't save you. Not this time. You wanted to live without me? Then live without me. Face the consequences you earned. Sophie sobbed harder. David whispered something I could barely hear. Please, Dad. I shook my head. You don't get to call me that. Not until you understand what it means. That night, I packed my things. A small bag, a few clothes, a stack of photographs hidden in the dresser. David as a boy with his baseball glove, his graduation, his wedding day. Memories that once warmed me now burned like ash. I traced a finger over the photo of him as a child, his smile wide, arms reaching for me. For a moment, the anger cracked, and all I saw was my boy. I whispered, I loved you more than my own life, son. I only wish you had loved me back. I slipped the photos into my bag, not to preserve them, but to remind myself of what I had given and what had been squandered. As I left, the hallway light flickered once, then died as the door clicked shut, the echo hanging in the night like a final verdict. Outside, the wind carried fallen leaves across the street as I stepped into the darkness. Behind me, the house stood silent. Not a home, but a tomb of broken trust. In the days that followed, the news spread quickly. Carter Industries knew the truth about me now. Whispers of respect replaced the dismissive glances. Employees who had once ignored me in the corridors nodded with reverence. Mason offered me a seat back on the board, a chance to step into the light fully. But I declined. I didn't need power. I didn't need applause. I had already won. Sophie's world collapsed almost overnight. Henderson's auditors uncovered everything: embezzlement, falsified invoices, theft. She was terminated, her reputation in ruins, her career over. Legal proceedings loomed, and the shopping trips, the handbags, the lavish lifestyle evaporated into dust. David, stripped of his job, his authority, his pride, floundered in silence. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to stand without the crutch of my sacrifices. Whether he would rise or crumble completely was no longer my burden to bear. As for me, I chose freedom. Real retirement. Not the forced retirement they had mocked, but the retirement I had earned. On my terms. I bought a small cabin outside Portland, surrounded by pine trees and silence. Every morning I walked out to the porch, coffee steaming in my hand, the sun cresting over the horizon, and I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. And here's the truth I want the world to hear. Parents are not disposable. We are not dead weight. We are the foundation on which futures are built. And when children forget that, when they replace gratitude with greed, respect with arrogance, they destroy more than relationships. They destroy themselves. I gave David and Sophie every chance to show kindness, to show loyalty, to show love. They chose contempt. And so I chose truth. This was never about revenge. This was about dignity, about reclaiming what should never have been questioned in the first place. My name is Jonathan Reed. I am a father. I am a builder. I am not weak. I am not forgotten. And I will never be anyone's burden. When I look back now, I don't see revenge. I see clarity. The truth is simple. Respect is not earned by wealth. It's owed to the hands that built your foundation. Love is not a transaction. It's the thread that binds generations. And dignity is the one thing no one can take unless you give it away. Maybe you've lived some version of my story. Maybe you've felt unseen, unappreciated, forgotten. If so, remember this: your worth isn't defined by who dismisses you, but by the sacrifices you've made, the love you've given, and the resilience you carry. That is honor. That is strength. My name is Jonathan Reed, and this is not just my story. It's a reminder to honor those who carried you, to never mistake silence for weakness, and to know that even in the darkest betrayal, there is still light to be found in truth. As the sun rose behind the pines, I realized something simple. I wasn't walking into the twilight of my life. I was walking into the dawn of my freedom. If this story touched you, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this channel, because somewhere out there, someone else needs to hear this too. And let me know in the comments, have you ever faced a moment where you felt dismissed, only to discover your true strength? I'd love to hear your story.